The last thing my husband said before calling the police was, "I don't know where she went." I heard every word, because I was still inside the house, not upstairs, not hiding in a closet, not standing outside listening through a window. I was trapped beneath the floorboards of the workshop he'd spent 6 months telling everyone he was renovating. The strange part isn't that he lied, it's that everyone believed him. The neighbors hugged him, the reporters called him a devastated husband. People brought casseroles to our front porch while he cried on television and begged me to come home. Every tear looked real, even to me. If you had watched those interviews, you would have believed him too. Sometimes I still wonder if I would have. But before I tell you how I survived the place he never wanted anyone to find, you need to understand why I ignored every warning sign. Because none of this started with violence. It started with love, or at least something that looked exactly like it. My name is Emily Carter, and until 2 years ago, I believed I had the kind of life people envied. I taught third grade at the local elementary school. My husband Daniel owned a small construction business. We had a 9-year-old daughter named Lily who thought every Friday night should end with homemade pizza and old movies on the couch. From the outside, we looked ordinary. Inside the house, though, ordinary had slowly turned into something else. It happened so gradually that I didn't notice. At first, Daniel would smile and say, "That dress gets too much attention." I'd laugh and change into something else. Then he'd say, "Sarah isn't really your friend. She's jealous of us." I stopped answering Sarah's calls as often. Later came, "Why do you need your own bank account?" "Aren't we a team?" I believed him, because that's what love sounded like to me back then. One sacrifice at a time, one compromise after another, until I couldn't remember where my choices ended and his began. Then, one rainy Tuesday afternoon, my daughter asked me a question that changed everything. "Mom," she looked down at the coloring book in front of her, "why do you always apologize when Dad gets mad?" I opened my mouth to answer. Nothing came out. That silence scared me more than anything Daniel had ever said. For the next few weeks, I couldn't stop thinking about Lily's question. Why do you always apologize when Dad gets mad? The more I replayed it, the more I realized she wasn't asking because she wanted an answer. She was asking because she'd noticed a pattern, and children notice everything, even the things adults think they're hiding. The following Saturday, Daniel and I were cleaning the garage when I accidentally knocked over a paint can. Blue paint spread across the concrete floor. I froze. Not because of the mess, because I already knew what was coming. Daniel slowly put down the hammer he was holding. He looked at the paint, then at me. "You really can't do anything right, can you?" "I'm sorry. You always are." Lily had been standing in the doorway. She quietly turned around and walked back inside. That night, she barely spoke during dinner. The next morning, Sarah called. "Emily, are you okay?" "Of course." "No, you're not. I'm just tired." "Then why haven't you smiled in months?" I laughed. A fake laugh. The kind people use when they're afraid the truth might escape if they stop pretending. "You worry too much." She stayed quiet. Then she said something that made my stomach tighten. "If you ever need somewhere to stay," I interrupted her. "I don't." "You didn't let me finish." "I know what you were going to say." "And? I don't need saving." Sarah sighed. "No, Em. You deserve peace." That sentence stayed with me. Peace. I couldn't remember what peace actually felt like. A month later, our school held a family picnic. Parents, teachers, children, games, food trucks, music. Daniel arrived wearing his usual smile, the smile everyone loved. He wrapped his arm around my shoulders and kissed my forehead. Several teachers smiled. "You two are adorable." I smiled too, because that's what I always did. Halfway through the afternoon, one of the fathers jokingly asked if I'd be joining the annual charity 5K. Before I could answer, Daniel laughed. "Oh, Emily?" She'd get lost crossing the parking lot. Everyone laughed, including me. But inside, something cracked. It wasn't the joke. It was how quickly he'd answered for me, as if I wasn't even there. On the drive home, I stared out the passenger window. "You embarrass me." He kept his eyes on the road. "I embarrassed you? You couldn't take a joke." I didn't say anything. "Exactly." His voice stayed calm, too calm. People noticed. I looked at him. I smiled. "You smiled wrong." I didn't know a person could smile incorrectly. Apparently, I had. That night, I couldn't sleep. Daniel was snoring beside me. I quietly picked up my phone and searched something I'd never dared type before. Signs of emotional abuse. I read for almost 2 hours. Isolation, control, financial dependence, monitoring, belittling, gaslighting, fear. Every article felt like someone had secretly been watching my life. By sunrise, I had tears running down my face, not because I was shocked, because I wasn't. 3 days later, I opened a new bank account. I deposited $50. It felt ridiculous, almost childish, but it was mine. For the first time in years, something belonged only to me. I didn't tell anyone, not even Sarah. I was terrified Daniel would somehow know. Because somehow, he always knew. One Friday afternoon, I stopped at the grocery store after work. When I got home, Daniel was sitting in the living room, lights off, television off, just waiting. Where were you? The grocery store. You were gone an hour. There was a line. He stood. I called 3 times. My phone was in my purse, so you ignored me. I didn't hear it. He stepped closer, close enough that I could smell the coffee on his breath. Don't lie to me. I'm not. Then prove it. I handed him the receipt. He looked at the timestamp, still suspicious, still angry. Finally, he tossed it back at me. You need to start thinking about this family instead of yourself. That sentence echoed through my head all night, because I'd spent 10 years doing exactly that, thinking about everyone except myself. The following week, Sarah showed up unexpectedly after school. I was nearby. You drove 40 minutes. I know. She handed me a coffee. We sat on a bench while children played on the swings. Finally, she looked straight at me. I need to ask you something. Okay. If I told you my husband treated me the way Daniel treats you, I already knew where she was going. What would you tell me? I didn't answer. She smiled sadly. Exactly. That evening, I found Lily sitting on her bedroom floor, hugging her stuffed rabbit. Mom? Yeah, sweetheart? Are grown-ups allowed to get divorced? I sat beside her. Sometimes. Does that mean they stop loving each other? Sometimes they do. She stared at the carpet. I wish people could just stop yelling. I wrapped my arms around her. She whispered something I'll never forget. When Dad's truck comes into the driveway, my tummy starts hurting. That was the moment everything changed. Not because I stopped loving Daniel, but because I realized my daughter was learning that fear was part of love, and I refused to let that become her future. The very next morning, while Daniel was at work, I walked into a lawyer's office carrying nothing but a small folder and trembling hands. I said quietly, I need help leaving my husband. The lawyer looked at me for a long moment before asking one simple question. Does he know you're here? I shook my head. No. She nodded once. Then let's make sure it stays that way. I had no idea that someone had already seen my car parked outside, and before sunset, Daniel would know exactly where I'd been. I left the lawyer's office with a folder tucked under my arm and a list of instructions running through my head. Don't confront him alone. Document everything. Tell someone you trust. Leave when he's not home. I repeated those words all the way back to school. For the first time in years, I felt something that resembled hope. It lasted exactly 3 hours. When I pulled into our driveway that evening, Daniel's truck was already there. He never got home before me. My heart started pounding. The front door was open. He was standing in the kitchen. My folder was on the table. Every page had been spread out like evidence in a courtroom. I was wondering when you'd get home, he said calmly. I stopped breathing. How did you get that? You left it in the car. I didn't, he smiled. You really should lock your doors. I knew I had. I remembered hearing the lock click that morning, which meant one thing. He had a spare key I didn't know about. He picked up one of the papers. Petition for dissolution of marriage. He laughed. So this is your big plan? I didn't answer. You think you're taking Lily away from me? I never said that. You didn't have to. I just want us to stop hurting each other. He slammed the folder shut. No, just one word. Cold. Final. No? There isn't going to be a divorce. You can't decide that. I already did. He walked upstairs, leaving the papers scattered across the table. That night, I barely slept. Not because I thought he'd hurt me, because I realized he believed he owned me. The next morning, I called Sarah from the school parking lot. I think he knows everything. What happened? I told her. There was a long silence. Finally, she asked, Emily, do you want me to come get you right now? I looked through the windshield toward the school entrance. Children were laughing. Parents were waving goodbye. Life looked so normal. I can't. Why? Lily, bring her. I need a plan. Sarah's voice hardened. You don't need a perfect plan. You need to get out. For the next 2 weeks, I became an actress in my own home. I smiled, cooked dinner, watched movies, pretended everything was fine. Meanwhile, I quietly moved important documents into a locker at school. Birth certificates, social security cards, medical records. Every Friday, I withdrew $20 in cash, just enough that Daniel wouldn't notice, or so I thought. One evening, he walked into the bedroom holding my wallet. "Why have you been taking cash out?" "It was for classroom supplies." "You always use the school card." "I forgot." He stared at me for several seconds, then placed the wallet back on the dresser. "I don't like secrets." "Neither do I." I almost said it. Instead, "I understand." The following weekend, Daniel announced he was renovating the workshop behind the house. It had always been an old storage building, dusty, unused. Now he spent every evening out there, hammering, cutting wood, running power tools until after dark. "What are you building?" Lily asked. He smiled. "It's a surprise." Whenever I walked toward the workshop, he'd suddenly appear. "Need something?" "No." "Then stay inside." At first I thought he wanted privacy. Eventually, it felt like he was protecting something. One rainy afternoon, I looked out the kitchen window. Daniel was unloading bags of concrete, more than 20 of them, for a workshop floor. It didn't make sense. When he noticed me watching, he smiled and waved. Then he closed the workshop door. That night I asked him casually, "So, how's the renovation going?" He didn't even look up from his plate. "Fine. What are you making?" "You'll see." "When?" "When it's finished." His answers became shorter, his eyes colder. The room suddenly felt too small. 3 days later, Sarah called while Daniel was in the shower. "I found an apartment." "What?" "It's furnished." "I can't afford it. I already paid the deposit." I felt tears sting my eyes. "You didn't have to do that." "I know. I wanted to." "I can't ask you to." "You didn't." She interrupted me. "I'm asking you. When are you leaving?" I looked toward the bathroom. Water was still running. "Friday." "Promise?" "I promise." Friday became the only thing keeping me alive. Every night I crossed another day off the calendar hidden inside my desk drawer. 4 days. 3, 2, 1. I could almost see freedom. Then Thursday evening changed everything. Daniel came home smiling. "I've got good news." I forced a smile. "What is it?" "I'm heading to a supplier tomorrow morning." "Really? Early? How early?" 5. Perfect. He'd be gone before Lily woke up. Sarah would arrive at 8. Everything would finally be over. For the first time in months, I slept. At exactly 5:07 a.m., I heard his truck leave the driveway. I waited another 30 minutes, just to be safe. Then I quietly began packing. Lily rubbed her eyes. "Are we going somewhere?" I smiled. "Yes, we're going somewhere safe." She nodded without asking another question, almost as if she'd been waiting to hear those words. At 7:45, Sarah texted, "I'm outside." I grabbed the last suitcase, walked toward the front door, turned the handle. It wouldn't move. I tried again. Locked, from the outside. A cold feeling spread through my chest. I ran to the back door. Locked. Every window had been screwed shut. My phone suddenly buzzed. One message. From Daniel. "You're not leaving me today." Then another. "Go look in the workshop." My hands started shaking. I didn't want to. Every instinct told me to stay away, but I couldn't ignore it. I walked across the backyard. The workshop door was slightly open. Inside, everything looked spotless. Brand new concrete floor, fresh lumber, bright lights, and in the center of the room, a heavy steel hatch built into the floor that I had never seen before. As I stepped closer, I heard a mechanical click behind me. The workshop door slammed shut. Then I heard a familiar voice through a speaker hidden somewhere above. "Daniel." Calm, almost cheerful. "I knew you'd come in here eventually." I spun toward the door and yanked on the handle. It wouldn't budge. Then another sound echoed beneath my feet, a metallic lock, turning underneath the steel hatch. I stumbled backward as Daniel's voice echoed through the workshop speakers. "I told you," he said, almost laughing. "You should have stayed home." I threw my shoulder against the door. Nothing. I searched for another exit. Nothing. Then I heard another sound, a low electric hum. The steel hatch in the middle of the floor slowly lifted, not by itself, by a motor. Beneath it was a narrow staircase disappearing into darkness. "What is this?" I screamed. His answer came immediately. "My insurance policy." A light flickered on below. Concrete walls. A small room. a folding cot, shelves filled with bottled water and canned food, a bucket in one corner. My stomach turned. He hadn't built a workshop. He'd built a prison. Mina Tinduff Cummings. I'm calling the police, I shouted. He laughed. No, you're not. I reached into my pocket. My phone. Gone. I'd left it charging beside the kitchen sink while packing. Daniel knew that. Of course he knew. You planned this. I planned everything. Suddenly the workshop door unlocked. For one impossible second I thought I'd been given a chance to escape. Instead, Daniel stepped inside. He calmly closed the door behind him. He looked exactly like the man I'd married. Same work boots, same faded baseball cap, same gentle smile. Only his eyes were different, cold, empty. You've made this so much harder than it needed to be. I'm leaving. No, I'm taking Lily. No. You can't stop us. He sighed as if I were being unreasonable. I already have. He reached into his pocket and held up Lily's stuffed rabbit, the one she hadn't let go of since she was 3. My heart stopped. Where's Lily? Safe. Where? With my sister. I stared at him. He smiled. I told her you had a nervous breakdown. No, she believes you're unstable. You're lying. I've been preparing everyone for months. Every strange conversation suddenly made sense. Every time he joked that I was forgetful. Every time he'd laughed about my stress. Every time he'd answered questions for me. He wasn't just controlling me. He was building a story. One where nobody would believe mine. Nothing's to do. You've been telling people I'm crazy. I've been protecting our family. You kidnapped our daughter. I protected her from you. My knees nearly gave out. You really believe that? I believe mothers who abandon their children shouldn't get a second chance. I never abandoned her. You will. He pointed toward the open hatch. You have 2 choices. I looked into the darkness. You stay down there until everyone believes you ran away. Or I call the police and tell them you attacked me. He pulled a small pocket knife from his jacket. Without hesitation, he dragged it across his own forearm. Blood immediately soaked through his sleeve. I stared in horror. What are you doing? Creating evidence. He smiled again. You'd be amazed what people believe. Nothing. I finally understood something. This wasn't anger. It wasn't rage. It was calculation. He'd rehearsed every step. Nothing. I'm giving you 1 minute. I'll never go down there. You will. No. He slowly walked toward me. Emily, I've already won. Nothing. At that exact moment, the workshop door exploded open. Police! Daniel spun around. Detective Marcus Hayes rushed inside with 2 officers. Daniel froze. For the first time, I saw fear on his face. Real fear, not mine. His. Hands where I can see them. Daniel looked at me. Then at the officers, then smiled. Perfect timing. He raised both hands. My wife attacked me. He pointed toward the blood running down his arm. She snapped. The officers looked at me. I could see the uncertainty in their faces. Daniel's performance was convincing, terrifyingly convincing. Nothing till them. Then another voice came from outside. Emily! Sarah! She ran into the workshop. I've been trying to get in the house for 20 minutes. Detective Hayes turned toward her. You called this in? Sarah nodded. The doors were locked from the outside. One officer immediately checked them. They're right. Hayes looked back at Daniel. Why were all the exits locked? Daniel hesitated. Just for a second. It was the first crack. Detective Hayes walked slowly around the workshop. His flashlight landed on the open hatch. What exactly is this? Daniel didn't answer. Hayes looked inside. His expression changed instantly. He climbed halfway down the stairs. The room below was fully stocked, prepared, permanent. He came back up without saying a word. Then he looked directly at Daniel. When did you build this? Another pause. Longer this time. You told your neighbors this was a storage renovation. Daniel swallowed. I changed my mind. Hayes stepped closer. No, you changed your story. The workshop suddenly became silent. One officer photographed everything. Another measured the steel door. Sarah wrapped her arms around me. I couldn't stop shaking. Hayes finally spoke. Mrs. Carter, did you know this room existed? I whispered one word. No. He nodded slowly, then turned back toward Daniel. I think we're done here. An officer stepped forward with handcuffs. For the first time since I'd met him, Daniel looked completely out of control. This isn't what it looks like, Hayes replied quietly. Then you'll have plenty of time to explain it. As the handcuffs clicked shut, Daniel looked straight at me. There was no apology, no regret, only one chilling sentence. You still think this is over? I didn't understand what he meant. Not until Detective Hayes received a phone call less than 5 minutes later. He answered, listened. Then his face went completely pale. He looked at me. Emily, your daughter isn't with Daniel's sister. My entire world stopped. Then, where is she? I couldn't breathe. Detective Hayes lowered his phone slowly, as if saying the words too quickly would somehow make them worse. We've contacted Daniel's sister. I stared at him. She hasn't seen Lily in 3 days. My legs gave out. Sarah caught me before I hit the floor. No, I whispered. No, that's impossible. Daniel smiled. Not a wide smile, just enough for me to know he was enjoying every second. You always underestimate me, Emily. I lunged toward him. Where is my daughter? The officers pulled me back. Tell me. He looked me straight in the eyes. I don't know. You liar. I honestly don't. His voice stayed calm. Maybe she left. The words hit harder than any slap ever could. None in him. Detective Hayes immediately barked orders into his radio. Amber Alert, now. Search every property owned by Daniel Carter. Every vehicle. Every storage unit. Every worksite. Within minutes, patrol cars filled our quiet neighborhood. Helicopters circled overhead. Neighbors gathered outside their homes. Some cried. Some stared. Some looked at me with pity. Others looked confused. Just hours earlier, they thought Daniel was a devoted husband. Now they were watching him leave in handcuffs. Numland. At the police station, the questioning lasted all night. Daniel answered almost every question with the same sentence. I want my lawyer. Except one. Detective Hayes slid Lily's school picture across the table. She's 9 years old. Silence. She needs her mother. Silence. Where is she? Daniel looked at the photograph for nearly a minute, then quietly said, I hope she forgives you someday. Hayes slammed his notebook shut. You don't get to play games anymore. Daniel leaned back in his chair. I already won. Meanwhile, search teams spread across the county. Every construction site Daniel had worked on, every hunting cabin, every vacant property, every abandoned barn. Nothing. By sunrise, Lily was still missing. Sarah refused to leave my side. You need to eat. I can't. You need water. I can't. You need sleep. My daughter is gone. She wrapped a blanket around my shoulders. We're going to find her. I wanted to believe her, but fear had become louder than hope. Lawmen's. Late the following afternoon, Detective Hayes walked into the family waiting room. His face was unreadable. My heart sank. He sat across from me. Emily, we found something. I couldn't speak. He placed a small pink backpack on the table. Lily's backpack, the one covered with tiny butterflies. I grabbed it with shaking hands. Inside was her favorite book, a half-finished math worksheet, and a folded piece of paper. My name was written on the outside. Mom. My vision blurred. I opened it. Inside, in Lily's careful handwriting, were just 8 words. Daddy said this was a surprise for you. Nothing else. No location, no clue. Just innocence. Weaponized. I broke completely. For the next 4 days, every hour felt like a year. The entire state seemed to be searching. Volunteers, K-9 teams, drones, news helicopters. People I'd never met stood in the rain holding Lily's picture. I had spent years believing nobody would help me. Now thousands of strangers refused to give up. On the 5th morning, Detective Hayes received a call from a highway patrol officer nearly 200 miles away. A gas station clerk remembered seeing a frightened little girl with a man 2 days before Daniel's arrest. Security cameras confirmed it. Not Daniel, an older man, one of Daniel's former employees, a man named Carl Benson. Carl had disappeared from work the same morning Daniel was arrested. Hayes immediately realized what had happened. Daniel had planned for his own arrest. He'd arranged for someone else to hide Lily. Insurance. Just like the underground room. A backup plan. Carl was found less than 12 hours later at an isolated hunting cabin near the state line. When officers entered, Lily was sitting on a couch wrapped in a blanket, quietly reading her favorite book. She looked up at the officers and asked the question that broke every hardened detective in that room. Is my mommy still looking for me? Hayes later admitted he had to step outside because he couldn't answer without crying. When Lily ran into my arms that evening, neither of us spoke. We just held each other, for what felt like forever. Finally she whispered, "I knew you'd find me." I kissed the top of her head. "No, sweetheart. I never stopped looking." Months later, Daniel accepted a plea agreement that spared Lily from testifying in court. The evidence from the hidden bunker, the surveillance footage, Carl's testimony, text messages, financial records, and detailed planning left little room for doubt. He was sentenced to decades in prison for kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment, coercive control, conspiracy, and multiple related offenses. As he was led from the courtroom, he looked back at me one last time. This time, I didn't look away. Not because I wasn't afraid, because I wasn't his prisoner anymore. People often ask me when I finally felt free. It wasn't the day Daniel was arrested. It wasn't the day he was sentenced. It wasn't even the day Lily came home. It happened months later. One Saturday morning, Lily and I were making pancakes. She accidentally spilled flour all over the kitchen floor. She froze, then looked at me with wide eyes. "I'm sorry." For a split second, I saw the little girl who used to expect anger. I smiled. "It's just flour." Together we laughed as we cleaned it up. That's when I realized something. Fear was no longer the loudest voice in our house. Laughter was. And that's how I knew we were finally home. For years, I thought love meant being patient. I thought if I stayed calm enough, apologized enough, and sacrificed enough, eventually things would get better. They didn't. The hardest lesson I ever learned was that love without respect isn't love at all. Real love doesn't make you afraid to come home. It doesn't make your child flinch when a car pulls into the driveway. It doesn't slowly convince you that your voice doesn't matter. Leaving was the most terrifying thing I'd ever done, but staying would have cost me something even greater. My daughter deserved to grow up believing that kindness is stronger than control, and I deserved to remember who I was before someone else tried to rewrite my story. If you're listening to this and something inside you is telling you that your relationship isn't healthy, don't ignore that feeling. Talk to someone you trust. Ask for help. You are never weak for choosing safety. Sometimes the bravest thing you'll ever do is walk away. If this story stayed with you, let me know in the comments. At what moment did you realize Daniel wasn't just controlling, he was planning everything? I read as many of your comments as I can, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you enjoy emotional stories about betrayal, survival, justice, and second chances, don't forget to subscribe to Blind Spot so you never miss the next story. Because sometimes the truth hides in the places we stop looking.